Okay, so today we're going over products of I. We kind of talked about these first three problems yesterday, but we're going to talk about them again today just as a refresher. So if you needed help with that from yesterday's work. And then what we're talking about today is super short, and then the practice is also super short. And like I'm not lying. Okay, so it says product of I, so find each product. So again, here we're double distributing. There's no plus or minus in the middle of the parentheses, so we're multiplying. So what's 3 times 2? 6. And what's 3 times negative 4i? Negative 12i. Okay, what's 2i times 2? Positive 4i. And 2i times negative 4i. We'll take it numbers. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And then we have I times I, which is I squared, because it was twice. Everybody okay with that first step? Okay. Then after that, what can we do here? Combine like terms, because these are both I. Now, this has I squared. Is that alike? No. Yes. Okay, so what's negative 12i plus 4i? So I know that those two together make negative 8i. But I know here, this piece can simplify. So this becomes negative 8. This is negative 8 times I squared, right? What does I squared equal? Negative 1. So what's negative 8 times negative 1? Positive 8. So that became plus 8. And then I'm going to bring down that 6. Now what can I combine? Yeah, the 6 plus 8. What's 6 plus 8? Yes. Okay.
I got lost at the
Green?
yeah.
Okay. So just a reminder from yesterday, I is just the square root of a negative 1, right? Okay, so if I square both sides, the square root and the squared cancel each other, and I get I squared equals negative 1. So anytime you have I squared, it technically equals negative 1. So we rewrote this as negative 8 times negative 1, because negative 8 times I squared, well, I squared is negative 1, and it became positive 8.
Okay.
So then I just combine like terms. You're welcome. Okay, so now look at example 2. So here, when it says squared, can I just square 4 and square negative 5i? No, we have to write it twice. So let's double distribute. What's 4 times 4? 4 times negative 5i? Negative 20i. Negative 5i times 4? Negative 20i. And negative 5i times negative 5i? Positive 25i squared. Now what do I do? Combine like terms, so I have negative 20i and negative 20i, which together make what? Negative 40i. They do not cancel because they're both negative. Okay, be careful with that. I see that a lot. Okay, if I take money from you and I take more money from you, do I owe you $0? No, I owe you more money. Okay, it makes it a bigger negative. Okay, so knowing that, what can I do now? Turn I squared into negative 1, and this becomes 25 times negative 1. What's 25 times negative 1? And then I still have my 16, so now what can I combine? What's 16 minus 25? Negative 9 minus 40i. Any questions with those two so far? Okay, so one thing I just kind of talked about is how those negative 20s don't cancel each other because they're both minus in the middle. They're the same thing. But when they're conjugates, one has a plus and one has a minus, will they cancel the middle term? Yes. Okay, so be aware on this one, you will cancel middle terms. So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 times negative 3i, positive 6i. 3i times negative 2i, negative 6i. And 3i times negative 3i, negative 9i squared, because they both had an I. So what happens to my middle two terms? They cancel each other out. These are 0 pairs, so they cancel. And I'm left with 4. But over here, I have an I squared. So this becomes negative 9 times negative 1, which equals what? Positive 9. And what's 4 plus 9? So when there's a conjugate, it most likely will always cancel your I's if it's written in proper form. Okay, so that was just kind of a refresher of yesterday. But now look at powers of I. Huh? Oh, okay, sorry. Powers of I are what we're talking about today. This is going to be your best friend. Okay? Because this is what's going to help us. So what I want you to realize is I to the first power is just I, right? Oh, you could write it as the square root of negative 1, but that's an imaginary I. That's all it is. Okay, well, I squared is negative 1. Well, what if you kept going? What's negative 1 times I? Isn't it just negative I? And what if you did negative I times I? Well, if you did it again, well, what that would be this twice, it becomes positive 1. And if you keep going, 1 times I is I. And then again, it's going to keep going. So what happens is you get this circle around this. But there's only 4 options for your answer, right? So anything to the first power is just I. What about to the second power? Negative 1. Third power, negative I. Fourth power, positive 1. So again, it keeps going. Well, if I do 5, I come back around. Because think about it. So if I do I by itself, it's just I, right? Well, then I do I times I. Well, that's the same as I squared, which we've already talked about how that equals negative 1. Yes? But what if I do I times I times I? Well, this equals negative 1, and negative 1 times 1 is just negative I. Or sorry, negative 1 times I is just negative I, right? So then if I do I times I times I times I, well, this is negative 1, this is negative 1. What's negative 1 times negative 1? Positive 1, right? And if I throw in another I, don't I have negative 1 times I, which just gives me I again? So what I'm saying is there's only 4 options. And if you keep going forever, you can. It's just going to keep bringing you back in this circle. So this circle, or not circle, diamond is our cheat sheet. Because do you really want to have to do this every time when I ask you for some big power? No, especially because sometimes I'll give you a power in the 5,000s, like on your practice. Do you want to do this 5,000 times? I don't. Okay? So what I'm showing you right now is that here, you can keep going around. But what if I give you a number that's so big you don't want to go around anymore? So that's where your calculator becomes your best friend. How many answer options are there? 4. So you take your power, which our power here is 5, and you divide it by 4. What's my decimal? 0.25. What does 0.25 equal? Just I. So here's a 6. 6 divided by 4 is 1.5. Where's a 0.5? At the top. So what does it equal? Negative 1. So let me give you an example even harder. So what about I to the 343rd power? Well, we're going to take our power, 343 divided by 4, and it gives me 0.75. So what's my answer? Negative I. So I'm going to do another one. I to the 260 power. What is 260 divided by 4? 60. It's a whole number, right? So if it's a whole number, what do you think it is? 0.0, so it's just 1. Are y'all okay with what I'm saying? Okay, so now what if I throw in a negative exponent? Let's do, hold on. I think that's the one on your example. Okay, let's do I to the negative 10 power. Well, negative power just means you need to make it a fraction, right? So when I make it a fraction, I move it to the opposite side because it's negative, and I get 1 over I to the positive 10. Well, 10 divided by 4 is 2.5. So 0.5 gives me negative 1, so I get 1 over negative 1, which just equals negative 1. So does a negative exponent change anything? Yes and no. Okay, it depends on what it is. Any questions here? Okay.